The 7 money mistakes that are keeping you poor. We have a problem, in this country where it is really tough for people to get ahead. We have a shrinking middle class. The rich continue to get richer. The poor continue to get poorer. And the whole reason why we started the Financial Freedom Fighters was to help people get to financial freedom, to get to financial security. So in order to do that, you have to be aware of the mistakes that you are likely making. And Mike and I have also made many of the mistakes and continue to make some of the mistakes that are on this list today. So I'm excited to jump into this episode today because I think it's going to be really tactical. I think it's going to be really eye-opening. And so we'll just roll into mistake number 1, living paycheck to paycheck. I have a chilling stat here, Mike, and we've talked about this in the past, but 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And I want to be clear here. It's not just people that are lower income that are living paycheck to paycheck. I know plenty of people that make 6 figures or more that still live paycheck to paycheck. So this is not a problem. This is not a mistake that is just pervasive to lower income. And I get it. Some people, they're living paycheck to paycheck and that's out of necessity. They're still struggling to get by. But what we're trying to illuminate here is that you're never going to get ahead if you cannot break this cycle. If you were just spending everything you earn, you're never going to get ahead. So you have to try to break the cycle as much as humanly possible. And it really starts with just understanding how much you're spending. And you have to kind of reverse engineer that aspect of it. Financial freedom is not complicated. You spend less than you earn and you invest the difference. But the prerequisite of that is that you understand how much you're spending. And most people do not even know that. Mike, anything to kind of touch on here when it comes to living paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah, it's certainly something that, I know I've dealt with in the past when I was a younger man and didn't understand what I was doing and didn't have a good budget. You have to really understand where all your money's going, right? I know you mentioned it previously. I don't know if it was an episode we recorded or just you and I in conversation, but you mentioned to me the one time that you can spread out your payments on a DoorDash now or something through one of the apps.
It's terrible.
It's crazy, right? And I know he's a polarizing figure that you and I often reference, but there's a quote that Dave Ramsey has that I love to share with people, especially when they want to get out of that cycle. He says, you need to live like no one so you can live like no one, right? Live like no one so you can live like no one. And like I said, I know he's a very polarizing individual that you and I like some of his stuff, don't like some of his stuff, but that's one that's always resonated with me when it comes to living paycheck to paycheck.
100%. A couple more tactical things here, folks. One thing that really helped me on my journey is automating my savings. You have to take yourself out of the equation because let's be honest, we are naturally going to spend the money that we have. If it's in my bank account, it might get spent. It's probably going to get spent. So you have to take yourself out of the equation by automating your savings. And what do I mean by that, right? If you get your paychecks from your employer, it hits your bank account every 2 weeks, you should have some rules set up that, hey, a portion of that paycheck is going to go to my high yield savings account. A portion of my paycheck is going to go to my brokerage account. So you're kind of just automatically that money is spoken for. And then you could spend the rest, take yourself out of the equation, guarantee that you're saving with this automated feature. Another thing that you could also do is you just have to take a look at your expenses. What can you reduce, right? And there's only so much you can cut, but you'd be surprised at how much you can cut if you are focused and diligent about looking at that. Can you cut your housing expense maybe through a house hack? Can you actually cut your transportation expenses and your food expenses? All this to say, we'll kind of move on to the next one, Mike, but you have to break the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. And you can only do that if you understand how much you're spending, you understand how much you're making, and you force yourself to save. And eventually, you'll be able to invest your way out of this cycle, but you have to be aware of the cycle that you're in. 60% of people are in the cycle, and you need to get out of it. So moving on to money mistake number 2, Mike, is not having a financial plan. So maybe you're not living paycheck to paycheck anymore. You still have to have a plan, because if you don't have a plan, then you're never going to get to where you want to go. So what are your thoughts here, Mike, on building out a financial plan?
Yes, it's very important. And you can start as simply as just a notebook, right? I mean, there's a ton of financial tools out there nowadays. I'm a little bit old school. I still use a paper notebook when I'm taking notes, when we're talking, and when I'm doing consultations with potential clients and stuff. I still like to take written notes, but you can start very simply with a notepad, right? And write down everything you spend. Write down all your income. That's how I did it when I first started getting out of debt 15 years ago. You can use this, you can create a Google sheet. I'm sure there's plenty of apps and stuff out there that you can download onto your phone to kind of track this stuff, that you can, probably sync to your bank account, sync to your credit cards.
Exactly. Look, folks, this doesn't have to be complicated. You don't necessarily need to hire a financial advisor or anything like that. And it doesn't need to be this grandiose master plan. A lot of people, let me ask you this. If you're listening to this or if you're watching this on YouTube, do you know what your net worth is? Very simply, do you know what your net worth is? If you take everything you own minus everything you owe, what's left over is your net worth. Do you know what that number is? I know what that number is for myself, right? I track that through an app. The app I use is Empower, but there are a lot of different apps that have this. You link up all your accounts. It's very easy, and it tracks all of your accounts, your investment accounts, your checking accounts. You can even add your real estate to there if you want. But if you don't know what that is, and even if that number is negative, and for some people that likely might be if you have student debt, if you don't own a lot of stuff, but what gets measured gets managed. Financial freedom, Mike, it doesn't just happen on accident. I'm sure for some people it does. You win the lotto or you hit it big on some crazy crypto meme coins or penny stocks or what have you. But financial freedom doesn't just happen on accident for most people. It takes a plan. Okay. You need to have a plan to get to financial freedom. You need to have milestones that you're measuring to get there. And so start tracking your net worth. Download the Empower app today. That's a tactical thing that you can do today to just start tracking where everything is and start measuring it. And I guarantee you start to get addicted to measuring certain things. What are some other tactical tips, Mike, that we can, give people so that they, start to be a little bit more planful with their finances?
Yeah. There's some rules you could use to maybe dividing up your, what you bring in and where it goes. The 50, 30, 20 rule that we've talked about in the past, right? 50% goes to needs, 30% kind of goes to wants, and, 20% is the savings and investing vehicle. Now, of course, you can tweak those numbers. If you make more, you might be able to invest and save more. If you make less, I really wouldn't want to, but you could potentially, while you're starting out, save a little bit less. You really want to pay yourself first. And I know it sounds hard for people that haven't done it. Maybe they don't have that muscle developed yet for saving and stuff, but really you need to, when you've mentioned it, is reverse engineer what you're doing. And hey, if I want to save, let's say, you're just getting started and you wanted to save $5,000 for your emergency fund. Okay, well, how am I going to do that? And you're going to commit to saving, say, $500 a month, but yet you've, the previous 3 months you've spent every dollar you've made. Well, obviously you're going to have to find that $500 from somewhere. So, you're going to need to look at where you're spending and see where can you cut. Did you DoorDash 4 times a week all month and it's an easy fix, or is it something where, you need to, figure it out from somewhere else, cut out the coffees or whatever. Right. So that's one that I like. To your point too, with the automations, I love that. Right. I automatically have money going into retirement accounts. I automatically have money going into my HSA account. I have money automatically going to this and that. So once you get used to that, you just forget about it. And it's like automated. It's just automated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Taking yourself out of the equation, again, is huge. Another exercise to do today, sit down and download all your bank statements or credit card statements for the past 3 months. Sometimes some people need a sobering look at what they're spending. Another stat is, most people, I think the stat was something like, 70% of people can't tell you exactly how much they spent last month. They have no idea. That's terrible. You got to have an idea. And when you have a general idea, I'm not saying you have to be religiously tracking this every single month, but you should have an idea, right, of all these buckets of spending. So sit down with yourself, or if you have a spouse, sit down with your spouse, go through over the last 3 months of bank statements and just start to get a pulse check on how much you're spending. You might be surprised at what you're spending because, we're living our lives, we're busy, we're going day to day, and, it's easy to lose track or lose sight of these things. So that's kind of what I want to say. And last thing is just have a goal. Have a goal, because one of the things that was most eye-opening to me on this journey, Mike, was we talked about this a lot in episodes in the past, but it's the 4% rule. It's just the idea that you can have an FU number, a financial freedom number. And that number is very simple, right? Take the average American salary, let's say $60,000 a year. If you divide $60,000 by 4% or multiply by 25, that's $1.5 million. So the average person to replace an average salary needs roughly $1.5 million. Now, that might scare you. That might feel, I'm never going to get to that number. But you have to admit that knowing that number is pretty illuminating. At least it was for me, right? And so that number is going to be different for everyone, but it gives you a target, Mike, to shoot for. And for me, that was really empowering. So again, you got to have a financial plan. You got to have a budget. You got to have a target that you're going for. So we'll move on to the next one, Mike. Why don't you take us on to money mistake number 3?
Carrying bad debt. So what we're talking about when it comes to bad debt, right? You and I both believe in good debt and bad debt. So, bad debt are things like high interest rate credit cards, personal loans, payday loans, even like title car, car title loans, things like that. I don't want to say student loans, but it can be, depending on the amount of student loans that you've taken out. If you only have to take out a small amount of student loans, then maybe not as bad, but those things. And then even car loans can be, especially if you're in that living paycheck to paycheck category, right? I was reading a statistic the other day. The average new car payment in this country is like $740 or something.
It's wild.
That's crazy. And just to give you an idea of the effects of that, right? While you were talking on the other topic, I brought up an investment calculator, right? So let's say you want to buy that BMW, right? If you had $5,000, which, that's a pretty small down payment, right? On a lease or a new car loan, and you took that $5,000 and you took the $700 a month your payment is, and you just invested it every month for 30 years, you would have almost $1.3 million. And that's, assuming a 9% rate of return over 30 years. And you've spent $250,000 to get $1.3 million. So just something to think about when you're having that $800 a month car payment.
Yeah. And we can double click into this, Mike, because I think for a lot of people, the concepts of good debt and bad debt are going to be pretty foreign to them. So when we say bad debt, we're really talking about high interest debt. And high interest debt that's not tied to any income producing or appreciating asset. For example, right, your credit card debt, which you're using to buy whatever, and the fact that you can actually finance your pad thai through DoorDash now is quite insane. But it's high interest, right? So most credit cards are going to be in the 16, high teens, 20%-ish range. And so the way you should think about that is if you're making like 10% in the stock market, right? That's half of the rate of return that these credit card companies are making on you, the individual who's taking out that bad debt. So you're never going to be able to get out of this bad debt unless you've paid it off, okay? And so the financial industry exists because of suckers that don't understand that this bad debt is toxic. Those people are making billions and billions of dollars for these financial institutions by not paying off their bad debt. Now, contrast that, Mike, with good debt. Debt, for example, to secure real estate. Why is that good debt? Well, one, it's lower interest, generally speaking. I mean, it's high interest right now, but we're still talking about 7% interest, Mike, versus credit cards that are at 20% interest. It secures an asset that, one, generates income and, two, appreciates in value. So sure, you're borrowing money, but you have tenants paying the rent that covers the mortgage payment, and then you have an asset that's appreciating in value, so that is good debt. When you're borrowing money to buy a car, for example, as soon as you drive the car off the lot, Mike, it loses value. So that's a depreciating asset in terms of value. So anyway, that's a little bit more of why we talk about good debt versus bad debt, but you got to get out of the debt. And I know we talk about this a lot, but Mike, you swear by Dave Ramsey Total Money Makeover, and there are a lot of strategies there, but this should be your number one priority. If you have bad debt, you got to get out of it because you can't get ahead financially with bad debt. So I think we've sufficiently kind of talked about this, Mike. So let's roll on to money mistake number 4, Mike, ignoring investing.
So, you've said it a lot, and I've stolen it from you a little bit, but you can't save your way to retirement, right? You got to invest in things that are going to go up in value, right? Because inflation is going to erode away any money that you've saved in just your basic savings account getting 2%, right? 2, 3%, 4%. So yeah, you have to invest. And it goes back to, that example I used in the previous step when we're talking about the car loan, right? The $700 a month compounded for 30 years turns into 1.2, almost $1.3 million. Looking at the math, that's crazy. If you're 25 years old and listening to this, and you're not thinking, okay, I got to listen to Mike and Jacob on this one. And here's what's really crazy, Jacob. If you change the lever on this one to 40 years, it doubles. It goes from actually almost triples. It goes from 1.3 million to just over 3 million with that additional 10 years. And that's, you often hear people talk about the hockey stick, in entrepreneurship, like you're puddling along and then all of a sudden it just goes up like the shape of a hockey stick. And that's where the compounding in investing can get really, really powerful, right? I saw something the other day that said Warren Buffett, like 99% of his wealth has been acquired after the age of like 65.
It's wild. Folks, this one really gets under my skin because I deal with a lot of people, obviously, in terms of their different appetites for investing. And I know a lot of people near and dear to my heart, that they think that, just saving a bunch of money in their savings accounts is the safest thing to do. When in fact, in my opinion, that's the absolute riskiest thing that you can do. There is a thing called inflation, right? We know that quite well. That means that your dollar is getting weaker every single year. That dollar can buy less and less stuff because inflation exists. So holding dollars or holding too many dollars is bad. I'm going to see how this lands, Mike. I'm going to go through an example here, okay? 50 years ago, $100, right? 50 years ago could probably buy you 100 Big Macs at McDonald's. Today, $100 can buy you, maybe 12 Big Macs. Significantly fewer Big Macs the same amount of money can buy. That's just a very simple example of inflation over the time period of 50 years. Now let's move on to something like gold. 50 years ago, a gold bar, I don't know how much a gold bar weighs, but a gold bar, visualize it, could buy you a house. One gold bar could buy you a house 50 years ago. Today, Mike, one gold bar could still buy you a house. Okay? That means that's just illuminating that gold is a better store of value than dollars. And then you go on to things like the stock market and crypto example. Bottom line, if you're just holding your dollars, you're getting poorer. Okay? So if you're that person that thinks investing is risky, I think it's much riskier to not invest. And so that's the biggest thing. A lot of people think that becoming a millionaire is really, really hard, or that it is about making a ton of money, when actually becoming a millionaire is a lot more about getting started earlier, right? Giving yourself that time. And we can run through a very simple example, very similar to what you said, Mike. Let's say that you just graduated from college. You're 21, 22. Okay. You have a decent job. I mean, when I graduated from college, I was making 60 grand a year. Let's say that you're able to invest $1,000 a month. Okay. Your paycheck is what? $5,000 a month. That's 20% of your paycheck. Let's say you're able to do that. You have discipline. You're able to do that. You invest that in the S&P 500. By the time you're 40, doing nothing extraordinary, just investing $1,000 a month, never increasing that amount actually. By the time you're 40, you're a millionaire. Most likely you're a millionaire. That's not that complicated. It's not that hard to become a millionaire. And I know some people might get mad at me saying that, but it's just not that complicated. It is a lot more about having the discipline and starting earlier enough. And so maybe you can't invest $1,000 a month. That's not the point. Start with $50. I don't care. You can invest a little amount. It's more about the habit. And then once you see the results of that habit building, you start to increase that a little bit more over time. And that's when things start to get powerful. But the point of this, Mike, is you cannot get ahead if you do not invest. And I'll round it out with some very tactical things. I think everyone should have a few accounts. Okay. Everyone should have a few accounts. We'll round this out tactically because I get this question a lot. You should have some cash to spend money. You have to have that. So everyone's going to have a normal checking account to do their day-to-day spending. You should have a high yield savings account because you do want to have some liquid cash that potentially is getting protected a little bit more from inflation with the high yield interest. You should have a taxable brokerage account where you're doing your stock market investing. And then you should have a set of retirement accounts, your 401k for your employer where you're doing the match, and then potentially a Roth or traditional IRA and individual retirement accounts. And then that's pretty much it. We can talk about crypto at some other time, but that's it. You got to have those accounts. And if you have those accounts, you're funding each of those accounts little by little every single month. And you're going to be set up for success. So we'll move on to the next one, Mike. Now that people understand they have to invest, they also have to understand that they also need an emergency fund. So talk a little bit about the emergency fund.
Yeah, emergency fund. And once again, this is going to be different for everybody because everyone's going to have different tolerances. But, you should probably have, 3 to 6 months of living expenses set aside just for the what if you get into a car accident, you can't work, or you lose your job and can't find a new one. The other thing too, which is kind of a scary statistic that you got here in our notes, is that 57% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency, right? Think about it nowadays, right? With the cost of cars and the cost of parts and repairs, that's like one trip to the shop, right? You need 4 new tires, $1,000. You need front and back brakes on your car, that's probably $800, right? That's pretty crazy. So yeah, not having an emergency fund obviously is going to be a very, very poor money decision. So like I said, setting up yourself to get, I mentioned it, I talked about it earlier. Even if it's just starting out and you have zero, say you want at the end of the month, I'm gonna come hell or high water, I'm gonna get $500 saved. Whether you need to spend more or make less, right? Those are the two levers that you can pull individually. You can make more money, so you can work more, or you can spend less, or do both, and you can really probably amplify it up. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'll take a different angle here. Having a good emergency fund means that you're not going to have to panic sell your investments, right? Let's say you have some stuff in the stock market. Let's say you have some crypto. Let's say whatever. If you run into an expense and you don't have that emergency fund, what's going to have to happen? Oh, you're going to have to sell that, your stock market investments. You're going to have to sell that crypto to pay that expense. And that's not a good position to be in because investing also has some volatility, and you want to be able to ride the waves of the volatility without having to sell, because that's what actually becomes really powerful, is not selling and just holding for a long time. And in order to do that, you need to have a emergency fund so you have that security. And so just to be a little bit more tactical, like Mike was saying, for me, I have appreciated liquidity a lot more the older I have gotten. I used to be the type of person that was like, you know what? I don't need any liquidity. Roll everything forward, invest in the next rental property, invest in the stock market, invest in crypto. But as I've gotten older, I've appreciated having the security of a little bit of liquidity. And so now I implement the 6-month rule. I spend roughly $5,000 a month. And so for me, I have roughly $30,000 in cash sitting in my account, in my high yield savings account at any time. And that's just for peace of mind. I'm not trying to optimize that money. I'm just trying to say look, whatever happens, I have that money. So emergency fund is really, really important. And so that is money mistake number 5. So let's move on to money mistake number 6, Mike.
Yeah, number 6, relying on one source of income. And this is really important for people to hear nowadays, right? The days of working for one employer for 30 or 40 years, they're long gone. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but companies don't give a shit about you when it comes to, the job security. Yeah, sure. Some of the really, maybe highly technical fields will be a little bit more insulated. But let's be honest, by and large, job security is certainly a myth. So where this comes in is, maybe you have a side hustle while you're, young in your career, or as you get older, like you and I, that have, we have rental property income. You and I invest in stocks that pay dividends, right? We invest in, ETFs that pay dividends, different vehicles that, pay us money every single month. Because at the end of the day, that's what this whole show's about, right? Creating the financial independence and the FU number so that, you don't have to listen to the guy, you don't have to listen to that boss anymore. So
yeah, totally. And look, folks, Mike nailed this one right on the head. In the age of AI, in the age of this technological boom, and Mike, you said, technical jobs might be safe, and I don't necessarily agree. I ChatGPT can write code better than I can write code better than most engineers. So maybe the technical roles are not safe either. But that's kind of besides the point. You cannot be financially free fully if you're reliant on your employer. So the ability to have an income source that's not tied to your day-to-day job is paramount to achieving financial freedom. And a lot of people, that's going to look very different. Maybe you do have a side hustle, an online business. Maybe you do have a rental property portfolio, Airbnbs. Maybe you do have dividend stocks that are starting to pay. But the idea that you have an income source that's not tied to your 9 to 5 is, in my opinion, absolutely essential in this day and age. And if more people prioritize building that secondary income source, more people, would feel more secure, feel like they could take more risks. And that is, ultimately what we want to give you is that security. And that peace of mind knowing I do not need this job. If you can walk around your life knowing I do not need this job, then you have a lot of power. And that's what we want for you to have, is to have that power. So you cannot rely on one income source today. Absolutely not. So whether that's rental properties, side hustles, whatever, you need to build up that secondary income source. That is paramount. Mike, I'm going to take us home for the last money mistake. This one's a little bit different, but the last money mistake is thinking more money will solve everything. I love this one, Mike. I love this one because, you and I think about money constantly, and we're thinking about how to make more money and, how to get to the FU number and all that. But I think there's a trap there. I really try to check myself on as well, is that at a certain point, you got to know what is enough. If you do not have a sense of what is enough, then you're just going to continue to chase. Oh, maybe the goal is $3 million. Oh, and then you get close to that goal, and then you're like, oh, maybe it's 10 million. And then you just never stops. That hedonistic treadmill, the goalpost always keeps moving. And then what? You die of a heart attack at 54. Because you never got to experience your life because all you're worried about is just building more and more wealth. And so the reason why I love this one is because, look, money is not everything. It's just a tool, right? It's a very important tool, and it can definitely unlock a lot for you. But if it can't just be accumulating money for money's sake. You have to have an end goal. You have to have a why. You have to have a purpose. And if you don't have a sense of enough, then you're always just going to be chasing more. So, Mike, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think very much the same that you do in this particular topic. For so long, everybody out there was like, "Oh, I got to get to 1,000 doors, or I got to get to 3,000 doors," and it's it was I read that book by Chad Carson a couple maybe 18 months ago. And that's it was like this light bulb moment for me, where it's
small and mighty real estate investor.
Small mighty real estate investor. He talks about when is enough, right? And so for you and I know that's it hits close to home for both of us, because we just don't need to be sailing on a yacht in the Mediterranean. You know what I mean? To be happy. So so that's where it's it hits for me. It hits for me. I don't rock a Rolex. I rock an Apple Watch. Like, hell, I got paint on this thing, right? Like I was touching up paint at a property, and I got paint on my Apple Watch. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't drive fancy cars. I don't, for me, I just, want to do what I want to do when I want to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, folks. So look, we went over a lot of mistakes today, and, you might be making some of these mistakes. Hell, you might be making all these mistakes, but we wanted to have this episode today to challenge you. If you're making multiple of these mistakes, why don't you this week? Why don't you pick one of these mistakes and correct that mistake? Okay. And then move on to the next one. Just take it one mistake at a time so that eventually you can get to the point, where you're not worried about money anymore. You're actually worried about how you're going to live your life because you have solved the money problem. And look, we're all on this journey together. We hope that you found the episode helpful for today. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on all socials at Cashflow Saga. You can find Mike on all socials at Realtor Michael Magno. We will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.
See ya.